We shall pause here and take some questions, also because Roberto might be a little bit time constrained with his return flight to Frankfurt. So I would open to questions, again, not only from the audience, but also from the other members of the panel or other speakers.
Hello, good afternoon. I have one question for Roberto and another one for Diego. For Roberto, my question has to deal with the limitation that hangs on the ECB to apply national law only to the extent that national law is transposing a directive. So it seems that national law is applicable by the ECB if it is a transposition of the directive. Then we have two problems. Problem one, there is no transposition. Problem two, wrong transposition. You mentioned that in these two situations, the ECB would refer the case to the Commission. My question is, in both these two situations, the ECB has a problem. It has to apply a rule to a certain case, to a certain situation. Does the ECB consider that it should apply direct effect, in the sense that if there is no transposition, the ECB applies directly the directive, because there is no national law, or it will apply the directive again in direct effect in a situation where the national law does not transpose the directive adequately. So in both situations, the ECB would be forced to apply the directive. Otherwise, there would be no provision to apply. So this is the question for Roberto. And for Diego, I believe that you have found the problem, or the solution to the problem of the financial crisis in Europe. And it seems that the solution is you just reduce the size of the banks. You switch savings from the banks to the capital markets, and you eliminate financial intermediation by having companies financing directly themselves in the financial markets, on the capital markets. And then you would have, let's say, a situation which is more close to the one we find in the United States. The question is, how do you achieve that situation? I mean, to have companies being listed in capital markets is a troublesome issue. I mean, if you speak with PMEs, it's small SMEs, SMEs, small and medium enterprises, no one goes to the financial markets to get finance. And even in savers, who are the savers actually applying their savings in financial markets? So how do you solve these two problems? How do you convince families to apply their savings in financial markets and companies to get listed in the financial markets when listing is really cumbersome and difficult procedure? Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions? We may bundle some questions together. Turno Pereira.
Eu iria pôr duas questões ao Diego Valiante. Primeiro, o projeto que agora se iniciou da União dos Mercados Capitais, a questão é, será que ele implicará um grau de harmonização das regras e de harmonização das práticas de supervisão superior àquele que já resulta, digamos, da última vaga de diretivas do sistema financeiro de supervisão? Portanto, o projeto da União do Mercado de Capitais implica mais unificação das regras e das práticas de supervisão do que aquele que já resulta, digamos, das últimas reformas, da última vaga de diretiva, de regulamentos, etc. Esta é a primeira questão. A segunda questão, disse que, na sua perspectiva, e na perspectiva, suponho que da reforma em curso, que não se vê a criação de uma autoridade europeia de supervisão do mercado de capitais. Mas, por outro lado, referiu aqui que era conveniente que o poder de decisão, por exemplo, na ESMA, se eu percebi bem, devia passar dos supervisores para a gestão, ou seja, para entidades exteriores aos supervisores nacionais. E, por outro lado, também referiu aqui alguns casos em que a supervisão devia passar diretamente para a ESMA. Portanto, acrescentando já aqueles casos que já existem, não é? Referiu aqui 2 ou 3 casos mais. A minha questão é esta. Será que essa necessidade de supervisão direta da ESMA se aplicará a muitos mais casos, neste âmbito da reforma da União dos Mercados de Capitais? E se assim for, não será que nos aproximamos realmente de uma entidade de supervisão europeia? Ou seja, uma entidade cujo poder de supervisão não pertence aos supervisores nacionais, mas a terceiros, e, por outro lado, com muitos poderes de supervisão direta. Portanto, eu só estou a perguntar se realmente, no fundo, prevê que haja um aumento de casos de supervisão direta por parte da ESMA. Muito obrigado.
Obrigado. Marco. Microfone. Oh, I'm sorry.
Catarina Machado from the European Commission. Thank you very much for the presentations. I would like to address a question to Mr. Valiente. You mentioned the need to move from a debt-based culture to a more equity-grounded culture in the corporate sector in Europe. I would like to know if you have any policy advice, especially at European level.
Aqui à frente.
Thank you. A little question to Roberto. How do you reconcile a fit and proper test based upon diverging national implementation of very broad general principles embedded in DCRD4 with the principle of non-discrimination? Because actually what I fear is that the next generation of case law will be mostly based on the principle of non-discrimination under EU law.
Outras questões? So we'll start the answers. I would have a minor question, but we are already under some time constraint. I would have a small topic for Diego on securitization, if you can bring a small word also on this topic. But let's move for the answers in the debate, perhaps by the order of representations, starting with Roberto and then moving to Diego.
Thank you, Luis, and also thank you, Sergio, for your first question. I would say if the case is that in a concrete member state there is no transposition of concrete relevant provisions of a directive, we faced this case in the past in the SSM, even though we have a little short experience in time, but we have already faced this case. Well, you mentioned the possibility to direct apply the directives. The problem is that usually, as you know, the conditions for direct application of directives are strict, and they should be so. And one of the conditions is precisely that the direct application of directives should not be detrimental for private parties. And the problems we faced is precisely that. I think I can freely talk about the case we had at the time, because it is not a secret at all. We have in some countries, CRD4 provisions on fit and proper were not transposed at the beginning, at least, of the SSM, and these kind of rules, which are requirements, which in the end limit the ability of institution to select, to appoint members for their management bodies, you cannot apply directly the directive. You need a transposition in national law. If you don't have a directive, a national law transposing the directive, you cannot apply them. So you have to apply just the national legal system as it is at the moment, and of course this creates problems of fragmentation, as I said, also of level playing field, because across jurisdictions you cannot ensure level playing field because of the lack of member state of fulfillment of its duty to transpose directives. But the problem is that you cannot punish, so to say, let me call it this way, the private parties because of this failure by the member state. And this is the way we try to manage so far these cases. But if I may, I like to say that When I mentioned that we apply national law implementing transposing directives, this does not mean that credit institutions are not bound by national law not implementing directives. That is clear. They have to of course, comply with these rules. The problem is that whether the ECB is competent to enforce these rules, which do not come from the transposition of a directive. And then we have a problem because of taking into account the principles of conferral, the powers granted to the ECB and the SSM regulation are those that are listed there and no more. So we cannot expand our powers by ourselves. We have to confine our powers to those that were already granted by the SSM regulation. So credit institutions, of course, have to apply national law. The problem is, which is the competent authority which is meant to enforce these national rules? This is the debate, and for some cases will be the ECB, but only for these cases where these national law are to some extent connected to European law in the sense that they can be framed within the tax of the ECB conferred for Article 4 of the SSM regulation and for prudential purposes. And I perhaps can also try to answer the second question by Mark on the non-discrimination and the concrete case of fit and proper. Well, when we have, as it is the case for fit and proper, very general principle rules at a European level, what we try to do usually is to produce kind of guide or guideline how to interpret these principle-based rules in order precisely for the JSTs in first place and also for the other staff in the ECB to try to have a common interpretation of the principles. And this will be also the case. We are working on in the fit and proper guide, which will be published soon, in order precisely to have clear criteria to be applied and to avoid precisely the problem of non-discrimination. But of course, again, our last barrier in that regard would be national law. If national law is, you have differences across countries, we are bound by national law and we cannot do anything in that regard.
All right, I'll try to answer all of them in the shortest time as possible. They are all very good questions that might require an hour answer. But let me start from the last one. On the point about how to create a more equity-based culture, as I understand. There are two important elements in this discussion. And if you look also at the United States on how they developed the private equity industry, there's a taxation element in two dimensions. There is the dimension of we currently give a tax advantage to debt, which is pretty clear to everybody. So the cost opportunity of investing in equity are higher, because if you invest in debt, you get also fiscal advantage. If you look at the bias into taxation, you know that equity is taxed, as a dividend is taxed, as a capital gain is taxed, as a transaction now in some countries. So there is a tax bias and a tax on the equity, in favor of equity, in favor of debt, and against equity. And taxation is important. And if you look, for instance, at how the UK scheme of fiscal advantage for equity investments in startups is actually working pretty well. And the UK has been actually gaining in net terms from this type of action. The second element is that the liquidation that is very important for market-based funding. If you don't have liquid secondary markets, there is an incentive not to invest in equity, because equity is risk-taking capital. So you need to be able to get out at any time, and has to be a fair price. Cannot be a price driven by, collusion between a couple of financiers in a local market where they have a huge stake of it. So you can't, as an investor, as a market investor, you can't rely on those type of mechanisms. And again, it links up to your first question, Sergio, and in particular to the role of having competitive markets and a competitive financial industry, which in my view will improve also financial education. Now there's this fairy tale, for instance, the Italians invest more in bonds because it's a culture, it's a tradition of investing in bonds. I laugh at it because it's not true. I mean, they invest in bonds because they get a huge fiscal advantage, and because it's the only instrument that most likely the bank will offer you if you go there and ask, I want to invest into something. My father wanted to invest in something. The bank gave him 2 options. In both options, there were Italian government bonds. So again, the distribution channels, the more it's open, the more it's competitive, the more stimulates the curiosity of you investors to understand, because it's in the interest of the intermediary to disclose information fairly and clearly, because this would attract the success for investors, be more profitable, and make more money. In protected environment, these things don't happen. And the second element that causes this is, of course, our pension and welfare system. I mean, we should increasingly increase awareness that our public system is not enough for your pension, for my pension, if I ever will see one day. And if you don't create that awareness, there is no interest from the investor side to look at how you diversify your portfolio. So there's no interest about learning about investment products, learning about... So financial education is not something exogenous that comes from God, something that is entrenched into the structure of the financial system and the financial markets. And I hope I answered to your question on that side. The other point on ESMA, right. I didn't mean to say that... I started with this statement, we don't want the SEC model, and according to what you heard from me, I'm actually advocating for it. No, it's not true. What I'm actually saying is that you can keep the peer review model, but in this peer review model, the mediation power of ESMA has to have some role, because at the moment it has absolutely no role in the board of supervisors, where the chairman and the executive director could vote in order to, get out of situation in which member states are stuck, and these are many. And if you look at the quality of level 2 MiFID II that has gone to the Commission, you realize this is a political compromise that you shouldn't see at level 2. You should see this at level 1. But you see political compromises because there is no mediation power in there. In all the committees where ESMA operates, there are authorities that are stronger and weaker, and if you are stronger, you are able to introduce an amendment without any control, without any mediation, because ESMA management and staff has no role in this committee except of drafting for the authority, the national authorities. I'm not advocating for the SEC, I'm just saying we need a protection of EU-wide interests into the governance and the management of ESMA. Thanks.
But Diego, just to be clear and to complement the question of Dr. Nunes Pereira, do you favor the reinforcement of direct powers of supervision by ESMA, meaning direct powers of supervision going beyond rating agencies and going, for instance, to auditors and other areas?
Yes, as long as we fix the internal governance. The moment you will be able to fix the internal governance, that can remain a peer review model. And I think the peer review model is a very interesting model. That it actually works. In some areas, we have been able to transfer best practices through the peer review model from, for instance, countries that were more advanced to countries that were less advanced. So it's very important to use it, but you need some mechanism which you say at a certain point when things get stuck, now the decision is this. You put a final word and you push forward the discussion, because that way it just gets stuck. And then, of course, you should enlarge the competencies in other areas.
Thank you very much. Thank you, both of you. We'll take here a short break because Roberto may have to catch his flight to Frankfurt. Just a 15-minute break, portanto em português, até às 4h30, e regressaríamos então para we shall return to the second leg of the panel, moderated by Dr. Bracinha Vieira at that time, and with Michael and René for the last part of the panel. Thank you very much.